Hey everyone, and welcome back to IDEANTHRO Movement. On today's episode, why you can't train the same way forever. It's really common in the typical fitness industry to see people come into a gym and the staff there might write you a program. You see this in the training for Cert 3s and Cert 4s, so fitness instructors, personal trainers and the like. They get taught of how to write a program for someone. And there's this kind of implicit thing that you're going to write a program for someone, give it to them, and they'll go off and do it on their own for some period of time. Or maybe you'll see them once a week and help train them once a week, but in their own time, they're going to do this set program that you've given them. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why that has some very, very, very real problems with it, even if the trainer is actually quite skilled. So there are some inherent underlying problems with that. To do this, we need to recognize something, which is that when it comes to pain-free movement and living, a very fundamental underlying property of that, or underlying principle of that, is we want to keep the body in balance. Now, I don't mean that in some kind of mystical, hippy-dippy sort of pseudo-religious sort of way, right? I don't mean that in the way of that yoga might talk about aligning your chakras or something, and there's this pseudo-mystical element implied within that. What I quite literally mean there is that if you get stuff that's too tight, too overdeveloped, too loose, then you start to get pulled into funny postures. You'll tighten up and loosen out in funny ways. And eventually the body starts to perceive that overuse of certain muscles as pain, and then dysfunction sets in from there. So we need the body to be in balance. To set an analogy of this, or to kind of make that a little bit more obvious, let's say, imagine that you're standing up, and so good posture has the pelvis in a nice neutral position. So we kind of stack as a straight line up through the ankle, up through the pelvis, up through the shoulder, to find a good posture. Again, I'm kind of oversimplifying here because posture is relative to the task that you're doing, and there's some oversimplification, but just for the, there's a lot of oversimplification. But for the purpose of this episode, let's just imagine this situation where you're standing, and the correct posture for this has the pelvis nicely in line with the rest of the body vertically. Massive oversimplification. I'm not even saying that's actually the ideal posture. Just bear with me. And so you can probably imagine that you've seen people, you can think about people you might have seen in the world who maybe had a kind of a sway in their back, would stick their hips forward the whole time. Maybe they put their hands on their hips and like push their pelvis forward. You might see other people kind of hunched over at times, and their bum is sticking out way behind them, and they're rounded over through the back. And so we might be able to imagine both of those examples as situations where we weren't in great position. Well, the tightness of the musculature throughout the body, but we're going to oversimplify this by talking about the pelvis here, the extent to which there's tightness or looseness can contribute to that being out of position. And I want you to think about this like two kids having a tug of war on a rope. So you've got a kid on either end of the rope and they're pulling. And if you imagine if we marked the center of the rope, then you could get a pretty good idea of this. If this kid over here is pulled, then the rope's going to go that way. And if this kid over here is pulled harder, the rope's going to go that way, right? So those two kids pulling on either side of the mark in the middle in this analogy is your pelvis, right? And if one side's tighter than the other, it'll go that way. If one side's tighter than the other, it'll go that way, for example. And depending, if you get a foam roller, right, and you roll out one side, then it's akin to that person suddenly relaxing for a minute. And, so we roll out this side over here and it relaxes and boom, we suddenly go that way, even if that side didn't add any more tension. But you get the point here, in that the soft tissues in the body can pull the posture and the structure around. Now, the point that we want to make here is, or where we're getting to here, is that the body needs to be in balance, which means we need kind of right amounts of tension throughout the body, right amounts of development. It's easiest to talk about tension as in muscles being tight or whatnot, but we could also look about this as amounts of of physical development and muscle mass and soft tissue mass as well. So we want the body to be in balance. Here's the challenge though, is that over a lifespan, let's say, just to put this in perspective, let's imagine that I develop a program that I'm going to do 3 times a week. I'm going to squat each day. I'm going to do 3 sets of 5 reps every day. Trying to make the maths vaguely doable for myself, right? So 3 sets of 5 plus 2 warm-up sets of 5 is 25 a day. To make the maths easy, we're actually going to do this 4 times a week. So we're therefore doing 100 squats a week with load on them, albeit 2 are warm-up sets, but 100 loaded squats a week. And there are roughly 50 weeks in the year. So we're going to take about 5,000 squats in a year, and we're going to do this over the next 60 years. So we're looking at about 300,000 squats, let's say. You can see that there's over a long enough period of time, you can accumulate really, really, really large volumes of training. So large stimulus to make something stronger or something not so strong, let's say. You could apply this doesn't have to be strength training. This could be the amount that you stretch. This could be the amount that you foam roll. This could be the amount that you sprint. This could be the amount that you run long distances. Anything that's applying a stimulus to the body. You can see how you end up doing huge amounts of volume. So if your training program that you pick to follow isn't perfectly balanced, the first week that you do that, who cares, right? It could be just subtly out, right? It's not going to make any difference whatsoever. But a year later, or 5 years later, or 60 years and 300,000 loaded squats later, that balance magnifies because we're out a tiny bit the first week, but then we added the tiny bit that we're out the second week, so we know that, and the tiny bit we're out of balance the third week. So you might, and you see this all the time in bodybuilding, where people have this massive over kind of fetishization of building the upper body and not the lower body. So you see people walking around with massive upper bodies and like literally no legs in them. That's the manifestation of long periods of time with their training out of whack between upper and lower body. But the point here being is that if you just set a program and then stick with it for ages, eventually you are going to pull yourself out of balance. End of story. And because those differences are so subtle, that it's effectively impossible to write a perfectly balanced program. Let's make that really clear. It's effectively impossible to write a perfectly balanced program. Now, you might then make the argument of, well, it's okay, Jack, but these gyms that write your programs, like they rewrite you another program every 6 or 12 weeks or something like that. Sure, but the underlying cognitive biases or inclinations in a certain direction that led to a program being imbalanced in a certain way in the first instance are still present if the same person's writing it. So they might give you a program that looks really different. So all the exercises have changed. The bodybuilders are a great example of this. All the exercises have changed, but fundamentally the same underlying imbalance, which is we did way more upper body strength work and not enough cardio and lower body strength work, whatever, right? The same imbalance is present. So we're still veering out of balance, even if the program looked completely different, right? And what this leads us to is that we need to, and everything that we talk about here ties back into the same situation. So one approach to dealing with this is then to go, okay, well, I'm going to get some professional who really knows what they're doing. They're going to like watch my training really closely and they're going to adjust it every time we go a tiny bit out of balance. But the problem is that the human body is really, 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 really resilient. You actually have to go and apply a huge amount of this load out of balance before things present themselves as problems. Have you ever heard someone say, I was just doing that same thing I did every single day and it's normally totally fine and suddenly I just blew up my ACL? or my ankle just blew out, or suddenly I've got back pain. I squat every day, but just these past couple of months, like I squatted the same way every day for the past 5 years, and suddenly the past few months, I've just constantly got this tight back. Yeah, that's the point. That's it manifesting. But the point is, it took 5 years for it to become apparent. So if you want to get some sort of professional to look at what's going on, where's the feedback that they're getting to know that they've got you heading on the right track? If that feedback doesn't appear for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you can put in a heck of a lot of load pulling you in weird directions. It's exactly like my serious amateur bike riding career. I didn't have any problems with my body from bike riding, apart from some crashes, like a twisted ankle and and like some damage from actually crashing. But if we're talking about just the accumulation of training over time, I didn't have any problems for 8 years. Any problems for 8 years. And then stuff started to manifest after that point. But the background challenges were being laid in place. So this has all been quite negative today. So it's like, oh my goodness, how do I know? I'm putting all this load on my body. How do I deal with it? How do I know that I'm not going to damage myself? I would suggest to you that the argument, or that the things that we need to do here, is to put in, surprise, surprise, huge amounts of variety all the time. Sticking with the same thing for any length of time is problematic from a long-term health and longevity and being generally useful point of view. Right? If we find ways to program in enough variety through bounded randomization, which we talked about previously in earlier episodes on IDEANTHRO movement, if we find opportunities to do that regularly enough, then what we have through that randomization is situations where, maybe there was a risk if we did the same thing of just continually veering off in that direction. But because we change regularly, the first step, because it's randomized, might head us in this direction. But the second step might also take us that way, but also gives us a chance to reconnect back. And there's some interesting maths you can do mapping this out and looking at the frequency. If you go, we could go either this direction or this direction the first time, and either this direction or this direction the second time, and either this and this, and then you see it kind of spreads out like a tree. And then map all the different paths you can take and how many of those get back to certain points. What you see is that when those decisions are being made at random, we cluster into the center, right? But if you just make a single decision, I'm going to go this way or this way first, and then follow that path, you will always veer off to the outer margins, which is where the imbalance is, right? But if you make a series of every single day, I could go this way or this way, and then this way I could go this way or this way, and this way I could go this way or this way. What you find is that, yes, out of all those decisions, some of those possible paths do vary way out to the extremes, but the majority of them actually sit pretty close around the center, right? They sit pretty close in around the center here, which means you have a far higher chance of actually remaining in balance, right, if you use a randomized approach. Now, the approach of getting a really skilled trainer to regularly change your program and send you in the right direction, conceptually, that trainer should be able to be like, we went that direction today, so we're going to go back that direction today, and then, we're back in the middle, so we're in perfect position, so we can go either, but then we're going to go back that way. Theoretically, they can direct you in a straight line, except that a whole bunch of the problems, the feedback that they would need in order to be like, we stepped left today, so we're going to go right tomorrow, they don't get the feedback about the fact that you even stepped left until you're way out here, right? So they can look at it and be like, look, on paper, we've done this much of this and this much of this and this much of that. But can you really spot that balance? all the different variables? You can't. The reality is that you can't. Now, if you've got someone who's way out over this side, yeah? Someone who's way out over this side, then yeah, it's really clear to see. So highly skilled professionals like physios and chiros and exercise physiologists are great about pulling you back into the center, because they're like, look, you're miles out in this direction. We know we need to be back over here, and let's do some stuff that goes there. Now, whether something else is falling out of alignment at the same time is another thing. But in terms of actually being like, look, I'm a healthy person who wants to stay healthy, then those really skilled professionals don't get the feedback they need to keep you on the right path until you are way off the path. So that concept of, oh, okay, well, let's get someone to help keep us in the middle path, it doesn't work particularly well. You are far better off. The actual practical way to do this is to, with some form of bounded randomization that through its structure is going to be relatively well-rounded. Bounded randomization is going to give you the best chance of staying as close to the center as possible. And then what you need to do is to listen for bits of feedback when that might be like, oh, actually, despite the fact that randomization gives me the best chance of being in the center, I have accidentally still managed to pick one of these outlier paths, and then I'm going to apply a little bit of deliberate input to push myself back over into a central path, and then let the randomization take over again. I realize that this has got a little bit conceptual and a little bit out there. I would love to hear your feedback about this. I am very excited about that way of visualizing this, and I might at some point need to draw this out a little bit. That's not just me waving my hands around. Okay, let's take a breath and recap. The point here is, the point that we've been making in this video, is that keeping the same program over time is guaranteed is going to be imbalanced. So it's going to be a little bit off today and a little bit off tomorrow and a little bit off in the same way, and it veers you off to imbalance. Theoretically, you should be able to get someone to give you a new program regularly and correct, except because problems don't manifest themselves in the body for quite a long way down the track, that highly skilled person like a chiro and a physio really only comes into their own, or an exercise physiologist, when you are a fair way off track, and then it's very clear the direction you need to go back. They don't get the feedback early enough to be able to change your program regularly enough. There's got to be the risk that you've gone off in a funny direction first and then get pulled back in. Funnily though, randomization, where we, within the bounds of healthy and functional acceptable human movement, where we introduce randomization, we talked about in previous episodes about how we do that. When we introduce randomization really, really, really regularly, what we in effect have is a situation where really regularly we have to make a decision one way or the other, and then another decision, then another tree of decisions. And because of the maths of how that works, because of every time we could go this way or this way, and then this way or this way, and then this way or this way, most paths actually end up clustering back in close to the middle. So it actually has the best chance of keeping us in the middle. And this should make total sense, because our ancestors that lived on the plains of Africa or in the jungles of wherever, they didn't have exercise physiologists telling them which way to move. They didn't have chiros or physios or personal trainers telling us which way to move. What they had was a highly varied environment that threw them up things regularly. And yes, some of them would have accidentally, through their choices, through those randomized things that got thrown at them, would have gone thoroughly out of balance and got injured. And that would have been terrible in those days because there weren't professionals to help pull you back in the right direction. But the majority of the population would have, through that randomization, stayed in the happy middle, the happy and healthy middle, and therefore had a body that's in balance and pain-free and moving well. And so we in the modern world can bring that randomization in to keep us in that central path, but we have the advantage that if we do accidentally fall into the trap, where we do stray too far out and we start to get some problems, then we can use skilled professionals to bump us back in the right direction, back into this central path, and then keep on randomizing from there. If we go off again, get bumped back in. Okie dokie, that is plenty for this episode of IDEANTHRO Movement. I would love to hear what you think about it. Give us a like or a subscribe if you liked it. Get in touch, comment below, whatever you want to do. Let us know what you thought of it. If you'd like to know more about what it is that we do at IDEANTHRO Movement, you can go to ideanthro.com/movement. If you are in Brisbane, Australia, and would like to check out our facility in Oxley, maybe come down and train with us regularly. Of course, we do allow drop-ins, but if you want to sign up, become a member, we allow a free trial, so you can check us out. You go to ideanthro.com/free-trial to get in touch and book that in. Okie dokie, thank you for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you next time.